This short video will discuss writing a review and chapter 15, as well as a little bit about unit 1 and what all we will be accomplishing in this unit. We'll talk a little bit about the Moth podcast and what we're going to review for our major assignment over the next couple of weeks. So just some quick points that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about what we know about reviews. We're going to talk about some characteristic features of reviews. And then we're going to look at the roadmap for writing a review. How do you write a review? We'll discuss one of the sample reviews in the text, and then kind of wrap up with our final thoughts and move forward to discussing where we're going next. So let's talk a little bit about this first. What do we know about reviews? I think that we rely on reviews in our day-to-day life, maybe more, especially with technology, than we think that we really do. We might not think about it a lot, but I know, for example, if I'm trying to decide, like recently, I mean, I'm old, so I'm sure my examples are boring, but recently I was trying to figure out how to organize the pots under my cabinets in my kitchen, because every time I open the cabinet, the lids just like fall out on my feet, and it's really annoying and loud. And so I was looking for a rack to go under there to put, the different lids. And so I probably spent like a half an hour on Amazon reading reviews on what size is this thing? Does it do what it says? Will it actually hold all the lids? Like, how many does it hold? And of course, I was relying on the reviewers to evaluate and give me information about these different, pot holders, so that I can make sure that I don't waste my money, right? So maybe you've looked at a review on Amazon, or sometimes they don't have to be formal reviews. It could be like a recommendation of a friend. You ask for what, say you're looking for a new restaurant in town, and your friend just says, oh yeah, I went and tried out, the new barbecue place, and it's amazing, and it's really good, and you should go check it out. And they give you like a list of criteria of why it's good. And, they usually throw in something like they didn't like about it too. So reviews are really relevant to our day-to-day life. I think that we hear and experience and give our own reviews and recommendations probably more than we even think about it. But when we start to kind of think about it, it becomes more apparent. The book talks about 3 different types of review situations that we should also kind of examine and talk a little bit about, because in addition to these kind of personal reviews, we also will experience reviews, for example, in academics. It is a very common genre in academics to see reviews or have to read reviews or even be requested to write reviews. Clearly, you're in a college course and I'm asking you to write a review. And I'm doing so because I think that there are going to be different places that you're going to run into reviews throughout your academic career. Rather, that could be looking at a book, you're in a music appreciation class and they ask you to go see a performance. Well, you're going to have to evaluate and criticize what you saw to give back that knowledge to your instructor to show that you went and saw that performance. Or maybe you want to be a lawyer and you're having to review a legal case and give your opinion on that case, right? It could be something like you could want to be a scientist and you have to review a specific experiment and talk about how that research went and be able to evaluate and analyze those things. Another function of reviews that we must consider is the media. Reviews come in all different types of mediums. And remember, a medium is just a means of communication, right? So they can be print, they can be digital, they can be verbal. It might be something you see online, it might be something you see on television or hear on the radio. You know, if you're watching the morning news and they're talking about a really awesome festival that's going to be in town, they are reviewing it for you. They're saying, oh, there are all these things and you should come on down and see it. And here we are, we're at the fair and they have cotton candy and you are missing out. They're giving you their evaluation and their judgment of that to convince you to come down. And how they're doing that depends on different cultures and communities, as Lunsford points out on page 301. And that influences the choices that are made in reviews. It's all about the audience and the purpose, right? If it's the local morning news and you're trying to convince people to come down to the fair, when you're reviewing the fair, you're going to want to, if it's the local news in the morning, you might want to keep it light. You think about the audience. They're getting ready for work or they're enjoying their morning coffee. They don't want a lot of doom and gloom. So you're probably going to not talk about, the negative parts of the fair. You're not going to talk about, a violent episode at the fair. Instead, you're going to talk about how delicious that deep fried butter is this year and how the news team, you can meet them. They have a tent down there, and the audience and purpose is all going to influence that. Our textbook also discusses an example of how, based on the audience, it might change your criteria for the review. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk in the next slides about how you write an actual review. So one thing that will help you when you start thinking about how to develop a review is thinking of the 6 characteristic features of a review. And if you want to kind of follow along, this is kind of the meat of the chapter, and pardon my turning of pages while I'm looking at my notes. I take notes too. Pages 302 to 313, so, 9 pages of the chapter really go into depth about different features that you're going to see in a review. And I really think if you did not read carefully, you should go back and read this section because it really tells you in detail with nice examples what you can kind of expect to find in a review. And the first characteristic that Lunsford defines, and Everyone's an Author, is relevant information about the subject. You're going to need to, depending on your rhetorical situation, to kind of look at what is going to be the relevant information for the review. For example, relevant information there. I pushed the wrong button. For example, if you are writing about the Moth podcast, you've picked a story from it. I have 120 students in English 102 this semester, give or take. So if you are writing about a story that you picked, and the Moth has thousands of stories, I might not be familiar with the story, so it might be important for you to give me some summary of the story so I know what happened in it, right? That might change if you were writing a review for people that already know a lot about the subject. For example, our textbook talks about a review of the 3DS. I mean, I would probably write a review of a Switch right now. This is a few years old. But it depends on who's reading that review. If you were talking about a gaming system, let's talk about the Switch. if you were talking about the Nintendo Switch, it would really depend on where you were publishing that review, what would be most relevant. Okay? If you were publishing this review in a magazine, a family magazine geared towards Christmas shopping for moms, like what moms should look for, the information you would put in about the Nintendo Switch would be different than the information you would put in for if you were writing for a gamer blog or, you know, a website geared towards hardcore gamers, right? What do you think like a mommy magazine is going to be more interested in versus gamers? Gamers might talk about, you know, resolution of video, you know, the picture, how crisp and clear it looks, gameplay, you know, how, I know with the Switch, they've had controller issues, you know, reaction time for the controller. Whereas in a mom's magazine, the evaluation and the relevant information needed for that is going to be different. It might be like, are there safety measures to keep, you know, weirdos from talking to your kid? That sort of thing. So, though the relevant information is going to change, again, it all is going to keep circling back to that audience and purpose. The same when we talk about the evaluation criteria. You know, that is going to, again, depend on and be shaped by the people that you're writing for. And you are going to need to establish your own criteria when you write about the moth. And in SWA 1 and in the short writing assignment 2, I'm going to be helping you develop that criteria. So look, when you are, I know that some of you are like, oh, the class went so slow in week 1 and I'm really just like ready to get stuff done. It's really going to be baby steps so that I can help you develop the best major assignments that you can develop. And we're going to look at what is good evaluation criteria. You know, you're going to need quantitative data and qualitative data. And our textbook talks about, on page 306, the difference between quantitative data and qualitative data. You know, quantitative data, you need facts and statistics, you know, things that are concrete that we can measure. And you also need qualitative data in your review. And, you know, that's things that can't be measured in facts and statistics, that are less concrete and more like a feeling, right? For example, if you're talking about, I mean, Nintendo Switch is in my brain. I think it's because I'm recording this in my living room and the Nintendo Switch is to the left of the computer, so I keep seeing it. But, you know, even you could talk about different, you know, specific speeds that the gaming system runs at, and that would be quantitative because it would be something you could measure. But then you could also talk about the feel of the controllers, and that's not something that's necessarily scientifically measured, right? Another characteristic and feature is the well-supported evaluation. And that's, you know, the meat. You need to have claims about the thing that you're reviewing, and then you need to have evidence for that support. It's also important when you provide that evidence that you acknowledge any weaknesses in anything. You acknowledge any weaknesses, and if you're really heavily criticizing something, you do acknowledge some positives, right? You have to have a balance. And you have to anticipate different perspectives, too, when you're giving a well-supported evaluation. You know, if you were talking about giving a review on a sweater on Amazon that you purchased, you might say, well, you know, I love the color green of this sweater. It is my favorite color, and it matches the love of my life's eyes. that is great, but someone else might want to know whether it's itchy, right? So, because they might not care about the color of your love's eyes. So you really have to think of the different perspectives. It's okay to put your own flavor in there, but think about your audience. And I think all of these three things really relate to our fourth thing, which is meeting audiences' needs and expectations. You know, you have to know what they are expecting to see in the review and then meet that expectation. For example, if you are on a website like, I don't know, Slate pops into mind, and they're reviewing a new album by a new band, or like Pop Culture Happy Hour or something like that, and they're reviewing like the latest Beyonce, right, or whatever. I don't know what the kids are into these days, but they're reviewing this album, and you have an expectation when you were reading that review that means they're going to be discussing the music, the songs, and then you're reading the review and they're talking about a new iPod or a new iPhone. You would be like, I mean, does anyone really use an iPod anymore? I mean, maybe, but I think most people use their phone. Anyways, they start talking about a phone. You'd be like, wait, I thought we were talking about the music here, right? Okay, you have to make sure that you're meeting the needs and expectations of the audience. And the fifth criteria is having an authoritative tone. And that's really establishing your authority as an expert. Show you know your subject. Show that you know what you're talking about, that you've examined it, right? And then the final characteristic is the awareness of ethics of reviewing. You know, reviews can have consequences. Obviously, the review that you're going to be making of the Moth podcast that you were having with your peers and giving to me, the consequence stakes are very low. It is not going to ruin someone's life that is on the Moth website. I mean, it could influence people on the peer review discussion board not to view the story or to go and watch it. They might say, wow, that sounds like a really great story. I might go listen to it. Or they might go, oh, that sounds like that story wasn't very good. I'll never listen to it. So, I mean, it could have some influence, but it's not likely going to ruin the storyteller's reputation or anything like that. But, you know, some reviews can have consequences. You know, if every newspaper, Consumer Reports websites come out and say that, you know, this car is overpriced and unsafe, that can really influence whether people buy that car. And, you know, so reviews can have importance. So let's talk a little bit about the process. And I'm not going to drone on about the process because we will be talking more about this in the next lesson, as well as we get further into discussing the short writing assignments as well as the major assignment. But if you take a look at page 325 in your textbook through 330, they have this really just inspiring roadmap that teaches you how to write a review. And we're going to be using this as we develop our reviews, and I really encourage you to look closely at this because it is just a step-by-step guide that's going to help you write a review on the Moth podcast of your choosing. So the Moth website is something that you're going to be examining and finding a story to talk about. I really kind of suggest looking at stories and going to the stories tab, and then looking at the library. Listen to the library. I think, yeah, that's it. Go into the libraries tab, and then you can just see all of these different stories listed here, and you can read a little brief sentence that tells you what the story is about before you listen to it to kind of help you pick the story. don't just pick the first story. Take some time and look around and see what kind of story kind of speaks to you. Maybe even listen to a few of them, because you are going to be writing a paper on it. So you kind of want to make sure that you like the story a little bit, or it's going to be really boring, to be honest. This is stories about humans and their lives, and these storytellers are telling these stories. They are not edited, and they talk about life, so, there might be some things that you think are a little racy. So keep that in mind when you look at The Moth. Most of them are professionally appropriate, but, there can be some that are about life. So just kind of keep that in mind. So my tip is to take your time. Take your time when you're looking for that story, and really just make sure that you're choosing a story that you want to write 3 or 4 pages about, and really spend time analyzing and evaluating. And the next part in the process of writing a review is to really examine that audience and purpose and your rhetorical situation. Remember that the rhetorical situation is the relationship between the audience, the author, and the text. And it's really important that you consider those things. And as you look through the textbook, and as we get further in the process, they talk about thinking about your purpose and your stance and what the larger context is, like where this came from and how it's designed. Looking at those things are going to be really important. And then evaluating your subject. What are your first impressions? Did you have to do any extra research? You shouldn't. Unless there's just some point you need to clarify, but there shouldn't be extra research for this assignment. You really have to determine your criteria for evaluating, and that's where the freedom in the writing is going to come into. You are going to have to decide what is important to your audience, and what do you need them to know. And then, of course, in the process, organizing and starting writing. And in this first part, we're not quite there yet. We're going to be there in the coming weeks, but you're going to eventually have to organize your thoughts, outline, etc., and then just start writing. And then after you write, you'll be drafting and revising, looking at your draft, re-seeing, revising. We'll be talking about that a little bit later on as we move towards that. And then I do always want to give a plug for the Academic Success Center. Once we get into the organizing, drafting, and revising stage, I know I'm kind of skimming over them now because I want you really to focus on the characteristics and this part now. Focus on this part of the process. This is where we're going next week. And then the following week we'll be getting into the process. So, take your time. Take your time. I know many of you are like eager to just like run forward, but writing takes time, and I want you to take your time. I will never not give you enough time to do something. Okay? So relax. 2020, we're going to slow down and take our time. All right? But you can visit the ASC any part in this process. If you need help choosing a topic, if you need help thinking about your audience, you don't have to wait to this part to go to the ASC. Okay? The Academic Success Center. More info on the Academic Success Center in our course shell. And finally, our book has several different sample reviews. I really recommend on page 314 taking a look at the sample review on Monopoly. It's a book review, but I really recommend it because they annotate the review, and so they give you some notes throughout the review that kind of tell you how this is a strong review and what Alan Mayak has done to discuss this book. And I really recommend taking a look at that. I think that it will help you when you're thinking about crafting your review, having some different elements. There are also some other samples, and we'll be talking about those as the unit unfolds. in the book. Particularly, there is a podcast review, which is probably the most similar to the Moth storytelling website. So we'll be definitely taking a look at that. And here is my works cited for the text. And at this point, these are just my final thoughts. I hope that this has helped you learn a little bit more about the characteristics of reviewing and help you to really think about how you are going to review your own story and how you can look forward to having success in Unit 1 and ultimately in Major Assignment 1.